Thom, because I think this is it's kind of the issue behind all the issues. It's, you know, what you could call it the Uber issue, I guess, the big issue, the thing that really defines, you know, what's going on in America. And that's, when was bribery legalized in America? I start out with a quote from Frédéric Bastiat, the French economist. He says, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And that's exactly what has happened here. We have one branch of government out of the three, you know, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. This one third branch of government, specifically the Supreme Court, part of it, this week laid out just an absurd charade, this so-called code of ethics, which has no enforcement mechanism, no mechanism for people to lodge complaints, not even any definition of what corruption is. It's a joke, it's a stunt, it's a PR effort. And I think, you know, a lot of people are seeing through it fairly clearly. But that Supreme Court is responsible. And I realize this is a huge statement, and I'm going to defend it in just a moment. The Supreme Court is responsible for our epidemic and crises of gun violence, the drug epidemic, homelessness, political gridlock, our slow response to the climate emergency, this looming crisis with Social Security and Medicare, the situation on our southern border, even the lack of affordable drugs, healthcare insurance, and healthcare itself. And you say, no, wait a minute, how did the Supreme Court become responsible for all these things? Well, every single one of those problems are happening because politicians are refusing to do anything about it because they're being bribed, paid off by individuals or industries that are profiting from those problems. And the bribery, this bribery crisis that we have in the United States right now, was caused by the Supreme Court. You've got three major decisions: 1976, Buckley versus Vallejo; 1978, First National Bank versus Bilotti; 2010, Citizens United. Those three decisions, for the first time in the history of America, or frankly any other developed country in the world, 5 Republicans on our Supreme Court. There was actually a Democratic appointee who voted in Buckley, but with Bilotti and Citizens United, it was 100% Republican nominees to the Supreme Court, said that money is not money, money is speech. I didn't realize that the dollar bills I have in my pocket talk, but hey, I'm not on the Supreme Court. So number one, they said, you know, money is speech, and number two, of course, speech is protected by the First Amendment's provision for free speech, which is in particular political speech. And in doing this, they struck down literally hundreds of state and federal laws, good government laws that protected, frankly, our democracy. So how does this work? We're the only country in the world that terrorizes its children with active shooter drills in schools. The only country where the leading cause of childhood death is bullets. The only country where mass shootings are a near everyday occurrence. Why do Republicans in Congress block every effort to save America's children's lives? Because they're being bought off with big money from the NRA and gun manufacturers. And why is that legal? Because 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court, several of them already on the take themselves, although we didn't realize it when this first started, legalized political bribery. The Sackler family spent years making billions by addicting and killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. But to this day, not a single member of that psychopathic family has seen the inside of a prison cell. Why? Because they bought off multiple politicians. According to reporting from The Intercept, they paid off the Republican Attorneys General Association, who would have been prosecuting them, and the Democratic Governors Association, who could have held them to account. Now, there was a time when these bribes would have been a felony, but not anymore, because the Supreme Court said they're not bribes anymore. Why aren't we reacting more rapidly to the climate emergency? Because the fossil fuel industry is paying off every Republican in Congress. How do they get away with that? Thanks to the Supreme Court. Medicare is being ripped off to the tune of $140 billion a year. Why does Congress tolerate this? Because they're on the take from that very industry, courtesy of the Supreme Court, Republicans on the Supreme Court. Cancer-causing pesticides, food additives, PFAS chemicals, microplastics lace our environment and our food supply, creating a crisis, a cancer crisis that is far worse here than in any other country, a developed country in the world. Why? Because Congress refuses to act as long as the industries creating these problems can legally continue their campaign donations and other bribes. Republicans in Congress and Nikki Haley are pushing for a new cat food commission. I don't know if you caught this. It was, I think, the most underreported story of yesterday. I didn't see it on any news reports. I read it in the New York Times, and it was buried in a story that was about something else. Yesterday, Mike Johnson, MAGA Mike, the Speaker of the House, announced that over the Thanksgiving holiday, he's going to put together a cat food commission, a commission to examine Social Security and Medicare, and they will have their first meetings after Christmas, after the holidays. They're going to do what Reagan did. They're going to raise the retirement age. They're going to cut benefits, all to keep from raising taxes on billionaires. Why do they do this? How do they get away with this? Very simple. Because Congress, because they're paid off, and they're paid off because the Supreme Court legalized it. Pharmaceutical industry, biggest profits in history. Why do they rip us off? Because they own Congress. Why is that legal? Because the Supreme Court said it is. We got student loan debt and our public schools falling apart. Why is that happening? Because the private school industry and the religion school industries are paying off congressmen. Why is that legal? The Supreme Court. The for-profit prison industry. Homelessness. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. For over 2 decades, Clarence Thomas and his wife were accepting millions in free luxury vacations, tuitions for their adopted son, a home for his mother, private jet and mega yacht travel, entrance to rarefied clubs. And Sam Alito's on the gravy train. Brett Kavanaugh, how did he get the money to pay off his gambling debts? John Roberts' wife made over $10 million from law firms with business before the court. Neil Gorsuch gets a sweetheart real estate deal.